I also rise to support the Election Offences Amendment Bill that is before the House. And Madam Speaker, it's important to reflect that this is one of the outcomes of the National Dialogue Committee, which was established at some point in the history of this country to stabilize the political situation. And Madam Speaker, I'd like to hail those who participated as rapporteurs, as chairs, as members of the National Dialogue Committee, and even those who presented memoranda to that very important committee. We are now starting to see the outcome of the work they did in the form of various amendment laws, but we are also seeing that result in the pacification of politics. And Madam Speaker, I hope that we shall find an equilibrium where our politics is no longer highly charged, our politics is no longer tribal, our politics is no longer partisan. We'll find an equilibrium where politicians will be speaking for the good of the country. Madam Speaker, the amendments to the Election Offences Act are straightforward, and they are subject of a negotiated and a long-drawn process. However, Madam Speaker, it is my view that the various pieces of legislation relating to elections in this country need a complete overhaul. In fact, Madam Speaker, I believe that we need to perhaps redefine our electoral system so that it reflects the unique characteristics of our nation. It reflects our history and reflects emerging and contemporary trends. Madam Speaker, let me give a few examples of where we need to change our election laws. I have said it before, that rigging of elections begins at the point of registration of voters. And Madam Speaker, it is not rocket science. And I wonder why we, the political class, cannot just accept that once you have a national identity card, that then should be the instrument that you use on the voter's day. Because the qualification to get an identity card is the same qualification to get a voter's card. And I have always wondered, and in my 10 years in this House, in my 10 years in elective politics, I have always wondered why that matter does not feature very strongly in our conversations around empowering the young people and around transforming our electoral system. Madam Speaker, right now you will find there are certain areas which, until as at the last election, there has been no effort to recruit the newly acquired citizens to become voters. And then we are going to have a stampede, a few months to elections. We are going to have campaigns, very expensive campaigns, a few months to elections, to onboard the young people as voters. Madam Speaker, how I wish, as we try to come up with national consensus on various matters, we could come up with that consensus that the national identity card is sufficient for our young people and for our citizens to participate in the voting exercise. Secondly, Madam Speaker, it would be important for purposes of national security and sovereignty to ring-fence our elections from foreign influence. When I looked at the process of tallying of election results at the Bomas of Kenya, I've always asked myself, what is the role and place of diplomats, ambassadors, and high commissioners at the tallying center? Madam Speaker, in the last election at Bomas, the American ambassador was very visible, very visible. Her fingerprints were all over the place. The UK ambassador was all over the place. And when we asked why, we were told that the US and the UK governments were providing technical support to the electoral system and to the electoral process. If there is one exercise that we must completely ring-fence and keep away foreign influence, it is in our elections. Madam Speaker, I read somewhere today that if news can be fake, then history can also be fake. The history of Africa is replete with rigged elections engineered by the West. It is replete with assassinated leaders engineered by the West. It is replete with coup d'etats engineered by the West. Madam Speaker, I am a Pan-Africanist, and I believe that there are those forces out there, out of Africa, that believe that Africa should remain independent, and Africa should never be fully independent, and Africa should never self-determine its direction. Madam Speaker, we need a law that says that when it comes to the infrastructure, the systems, the processes, everything to do with our electoral system, we shall make it homegrown. And we have no shortage of skills, whether it is a technology. The other day, the CS Treasury was here telling us about e-citizen. developed by locals. It is handling billions of shillings on a daily basis or on a monthly basis. If we can trust our young people to build a system of that nature, why can't we trust them to build an electoral system so that we do not have to go to foreign countries to get that technology? Madam Speaker, even when it comes to capacity building, it should not go beyond our electoral officers making tours to those countries to see how they do it. But we should not have a situation where you've got a foreign-funded organization being the one offering technical and capacity building for our electoral officials and our electoral systems. I believe, Madam Speaker, even if it's just coming from ordinary revenue, even if it's coming from a specified fund, our electoral system should not be subject of multilateral or bilateral agreements. It should be homegrown, because if we do so, we rid our electoral system of foreign influence. And Madam Speaker, if you've read about the history of Africa, and not the fake version of African history, the West always has an interest in electoral outcomes, because whoever becomes the president of a country, Madam Speaker, sometimes influences the kind of relationships that country has with the West. We have seen interference in electoral systems in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Madam Speaker. Even in Kenya, Madam Speaker, I am convinced that there has been undue foreign influence in our electoral systems. And so that is part of what we need to look at in a complete and comprehensive overhaul of our election laws. Madam Speaker, the senators in this House have to spend a lot of money to get elected. Why? Because we've got an electoral system that has put the responsibility for trust and responsibility of ensuring accuracy of results on the candidate rather than the commission itself. Madam Speaker, you have heard previously when petitions have been taken to the Supreme Court on presidential election results, where the IEBC, that is mandated to ensure trust, accuracy, and integrity of results, referring to returns of agents of candidates. Madam Speaker, we should not be investing in agents in elections. If we have an independent electoral body that is of the highest integrity and credibility, and it is a very expensive undertaking. Madam Speaker, you can imagine, before election day, 3 days to elections, all of us here as senators, when you're organizing your own campaigns, you need to call your agents to a central place to train them. You call them to a central place to give them the oath of secrecy. You have to keep them in a central place so that they are not poached by your opponents. On election day, they have to be at the polling station. They have to be at the tallying center at night. They have to sit for 3-4 days waiting for the results to come out. Meanwhile, Madam Speaker, you are maintaining them, paying them allowances, giving them airtime, taking care of their food, taking care of their accommodation. Election day expenses of a senator in this House, Madam Speaker, is on average 10 million Kenya shillings. That is if you decide to deploy your agents in a proper manner. Of course, there are some of us who sometimes you find you don't have strong opposition, and then you decide to just ride on existing systems. But where the situation is tight, Madam Speaker, a senator will be required to have 10 million shillings for the 3 days pre- and post-election. If you multiply that by the 47 counties, we are looking at an enterprise, Madam Speaker, that is hundreds of millions of shillings. It's actually billions, Madam Speaker, that could have been put to better use. And I've just spoken about the position of the senator. I've not spoken about the woman representative. I've not spoken about the governor. I've not spoken about the president. Madam Speaker, in the American system, it is estimated that
use PDF Filler to edit documents anytime, anywhere, from any device. Add text.
Politics. And that was more than the budget of half the American states. If you look at our expenses when it comes to elections, Madam Speaker, it is money that could have been directed to other places, but we spend it because we have no trust, because we have an electoral body that has not demonstrated integrity. Madam Speaker, we need to also look at the other laws that relate to spending on elections, but we can reduce that expenditure if we build institutions, technologies, systems